You're listening to Girls with Grafts, a burn community podcast created by Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, a leading nonprofit dedicated to supporting the burn community. In this podcast, we'll talk with burn survivors, share resources to help with supporting and improving burn recovery, and discuss how to prevent burn injuries. Here are your hosts, burn survivors and Phoenix Society's marketing team, Amber Wilcox and Rachel Kudlak.
Hello and welcome back to Girls with Grafts. I am Rachel Kudlak, one of the hosts of the podcast, and I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Amber Wilcox.
Good morning, afternoon. What is it now? Morning still. It's we are chugging along here with Girls with Grafts. Excited for we're coming up on the end of this season. I can't believe we've got another whole season in the books here. So excited for the holidays. How about yourself?
Yeah, no, the end of the year is always one of my favorite times. I do love the holidays right now. And I'm sorry if my voice sounds a little different, getting over being a little sick, but I feel like everyone's sick. It's just the time of year. And we just had a staff retreat 2 weeks ago, and the coughing on the plane, I was just like, oh, I'm going to get sick. There's no way I can avoid this.
Where was your staff retreat?
It was actually in your neck of the woods. It was, we went to Orlando Health for a day and a half.
Very fun. Nice to hear. Well, I'm glad you guys had a nice little visit in Orlando.
Yes.
Visit Mickey Mouse at all?
No, I really was there for like 48 hours. It was a really quick trip. But Orlando Health is our next Journey Forward hospital. So they're launching after the new year. So it's really great. If folks don't know, our vice president on our board, Mallory, works at Orlando Health. So that's kind of why she did promise us it was going to be warm though. And it was quite chilly, even for me saying that when we were there. So could have used a little warmer temps in Florida.
It was very chilly here, and then it warmed up this week. It's in the 70s. So, but I prefer it to be a little bit chillier this time of year because I feel like it doesn't feel like Christmas when it's freezing. So, when it's not freezing. When I'm sweating out. So, yeah, I'm ready for it to I'm speaking it out there now. It needs to cool down a little bit because I want to be able to not have to wear shorts and flip-flops on Christmas Eve. So with that said, today's podcast sponsor, if you will introduce them and then we'll get started.
Yes. So today's podcast is powered by Monarchy Healthcare. Monarchy is a world-leading med tech company that specializes in innovative solutions for wound care and surgical procedures. Monarchy products and solutions are used daily by hospitals, healthcare providers, and patients in over 100 countries around the world. Monarchy Healthcare's advanced wound care dressings are enabled by SafeTac technology, a gentle silicone adhesive that reduces pain and minimizes skin trauma of burn survivors at dressing changes. For more information about burn care solutions, you can visit their website at monarchy.us/solutions/burns. And we'll make sure we have that in our show notes as well for folks who want to learn more about Monarchy. So without further ado, I'm really excited to have on today's podcast guest. So today's guest is Cat Eustace. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Cat first worked in the music industry at a major record label. When her now husband was hit by a car and required surgery and full-time care during his recovery, she quit the music industry to take care of him. That resulted in changing careers to become a nurse. After getting her BSN from the University of Miami, Catherine worked for years in the ER and then transitioned to burn care 7 years ago. The burn ICU was not in the plan, but after starting, she didn't want to work anywhere else. Over the last few years, she took over the Outpatient Burn Clinic and has enjoyed the transition. Getting to educate patients, working with burn patients of all ages, and doing community outreach as well. She is married with 2 small children and currently lives in Los Angeles suburbs with her family and 13-year-old terrier Marshall. So thank you so much, Cat, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, welcome. Well, I know Rachel just read your bio, which was very interesting. Rachel knows I'm always interested to hear more about our guests, and there was a lot of cool things that I heard there in your bio. But let's first start kind of letting our listeners or those that are viewing know a little bit more about why you chose to kind of delve into the world of burn care. I know we started a little bit about your husband being hit by a car. Was that a burn injury that he had, or was that related to something like more of like a traumatic incident?
No. Yeah. So it was trauma. He was coming home on a scooter. He saw a scooter and somebody made the left turn into him. So he ended up at Cedars. I knew nothing. Like, I always thought medicine was cool. I just didn't think I was smart enough to do it. Like, I thought it was very interesting. But when he was in the hospital, I quit my job to take care of him. And I was like, oh, I could do this. Like, this is achievable for me. And so, yeah, that was my second career. Burns definitely was not in the plans, never on my radar. When I worked in the ER, anytime we'd get a burn patient, everybody would kind of like, leave it alone. Nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to do anything with it. And then moving back to LA from Florida, I wanted to be close to home since I had a baby. And it just so happened that there was a burn center 5 minutes from my house, and there was an opening. And I interviewed. I loved my director. She was amazing. And she was like, I think you can do this. She's like, you're either going to love it or you're not. And I love it. And I've been here ever since. And I really cannot imagine working anywhere else. And I get patients all the time like, how can you do this? Isn't it so horrible? Isn't it bad? And I say, I can do it because I have been there when I have a ICU patient intubated, 50, 60, 70% burn. And I am there to see them walk out of the hospital. Mm-hmm. And that is why I do my job. And that's why I love my job.
Yeah,
I think there's something to be said also about why you started. I always said to my husband, so I was burned later in life. And my husband had to become kind of like my primary caregiver, right? I spent like a week in the hospital, but looking back, right, maybe I should have spent some more time because of how like long the dressing changes I had were. With that said, we had home health care, and then I kind of let them go because I liked my husband's care better. Yes. But with that said, my husband, like, I never in a million years pictured my husband being the person to be able to like do my dressing changes. Not because he's like, he can't do it. I believe he could, but I just didn't think he'd be somebody who would be okay with like, right, these open wounds and all this dressing. And he just took on the role and did it. And there has to be something I'd imagine, because after he did that, I'm like, you can do anything, right? Like I know you can do anything. I feel like there has to be something along the lines of like that experience with your husband, with you as well, right? You kind of felt like empowered to take care of him. And then you're like, well, if I can do this, I can do anything, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's true. And your experience, I would tell my patients when I worked on the floor, I would tell the family members, I'm like, look, you're going to get home health, but you know more than they do. Like, you know how to do a burn dressing. We're showing you how to do it. Like the family member, the patient, you've been here for 2-3 weeks. You know what's right and what's wrong, or the proper way, improper way. And, then seeing the other side of it when I came to outpatient, and these patients were like, oh my gosh, the home health nurse didn't know what they were doing. They had never seen a burn. They were afraid of touching it. And that was a big part of, for me, again, taking care of, my now husband. I'm like, it's a lot of encouragement and just doing things that you didn't think you were capable of doing, or doing things you didn't think, oh, I would never want to do that. I would never or it didn't even cross your mind to like, yep, I can do this. And I think I'm pretty good at it. So just I still encourage my patients' families, and they're like, I don't want to look at it. I don't want to touch it. I go, you are the only one who knows what this is like right now. And you know more than, again, the home health. It's okay. Speak up, tell them, teach them. Like they don't really understand. So
I think that's a huge gap in burn care, in my opinion, in general, is the home health care. I actually just was in a conversation last week about this, but I feel like from my experience, I live in, we call it like an older person town, right? There's a lot of older folks. So when you're in a community of older folks, like burn care isn't popular, right? Like the home health care, they're spending every single day going to these homes of older folks, just helping them do the basic care. So I was at the time, right, I think late 20s, early 30s, right? And so like to have somebody like me with that such size of a burn to walk into that, I'll never forget. My husband and I tell this story and we still laugh about it, even though it's not funny. The home healthcare like folk, I had 20% burn and she showed up with like a 4x4 square of like gauze to cover my wounds, and some alcoholic spray, right? And I'll never forget, like my husband and I were like, no, that's not how it happens, right? And we had to educate her and go through it, but she still didn't really fully comprehend and understand the process. And part of what we wanted to do in home healthcare was to say like, hey, we'd rather you just watch and make sure I don't have an infection. I don't want you doing it. I don't trust you. I don't know you. I want my husband to do it. And that kind of was a gap where she was like, no, I don't really feel comfortable with that. I want to do it. And I just didn't enjoy it. So I was like, no, I'm done. Right. I want my husband to do it. I don't need your help. And so we ended up switching to physical therapy, which we had the option of either or with my insurance plan at the time. So yeah, I think that's a big gap. And I think it's something that continue to advocate for yourself or continue to, and I think if anyone, in home healthcare is listening out there, I think it's important that we do better in educating home healthcare providers. Even if they think they know, I think there's a lot they have to learn.
I agree. And I'm like, honestly, I'm super proud of you for saying that, because I get patients and they're like, I assume they knew best because they're coming to my house. And I said, no, I'll tell them, because again, I'm on this side. I said, I had a whole spiel for my discharge, patients, because that's just unfortunately how it is. And I was trying to advocate for like, I will teach home health. Like, let's do a home health seminar for our local ones that we use the most of. But what I was hearing from like one of our COOs, she's like, it's just, we've done that, but they have such high turnover, and it's just, and then it depends on the insurance, and there's always new companies, and so I am a huge proponent for education. Like I'm a huge nerd like that. Like I love it. And I want people to understand, because I think it's cool, and I think it's important to know. And if share your knowledge. And so what kind of my plan has been over the last 2 years, we're trying to work on making like a discharge education video, because, we're educating our patients and it's just so overwhelming. And, you ladies, when you go home, it is very different. The first few days are very different from being in that facility to being at home and adjusting to being at home and not having all that support. And you're relying on one person or maybe a friend or family member or something. So my goal is to try to get this video going. So to do a basic dressing change for basic burn care, so that you can show it to a home health nurse. You can show it to a family member and be like, this is actually how it's supposed to be done.
I agree.
That's one of my goals. We'll see if it.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of like, oh shit moments, right? In the beginning of like getting home from the hospital. Like I get home and I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how lucky I was to still be in that hospital until I got home. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't like being in the hospital, but I really don't enjoy being home with having to do this or not having someone to help us. So like I said, I think it's a weird, right? You think that home healthcare is going to just be the same folks that you saw while you're at the hospital. And the sad reality is that they weren't. So, right. My husband and I can't stress enough for the caregivers, like pay attention, right? Because my husband like paid attention. He took videos of, my nurses doing it. And like, we really like made sure we had it right. And we continued to watch them do it. And the best thing I could ever, Joey, who was actually on this show, was one of my nurses. And I'll never forget, he made my husband. So he showed my husband and then he came back and he undressed me again. He was like, do it again. So he made my husband actually physically do it and check it. And I think that is so important to like, I'm a very hands-on learner. So even if it's like doing and dressing changes 2 and 3 times, but my husband, like, it was kind of like muscle memory at that point of remembering before he moved forward and was able to like take me home. And because of that education that Orlando Health gave us, we'll continue to, right, like know that was the best thing they could have done for us when we left the hospital.
Absolutely. And you're lucky you have a husband who was willing to learn. I mean, we get, family members are like, I don't want to look at it. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to be near
I
it.
understand that.
And yeah. And I understand that too. And
yeah.
I try to be encouraging and say, you need to be the support. You're going to have to,
in sickness and in health.
It's challenging, but I promise you'll know how to do this. And then you'll go around the neighborhood and be like, anybody need help with burn?
After that, I was like, you got it. You can do wound care anywhere. And family members I shared it on my Instagram, which is, again, not everybody wants to see that, but I did because I was so proud of him. And after that, family members, friends will message us and say like, hey, what did you use? Like, because he was so impactful, not just for me, but it does take a special person to be able to have the stomach and the will and the understanding to do it. Not everybody can, and that's okay. I understand, like, my mother-in-law, I know, it was like, I can't look at it. Like, it hurts me to look at it. And it does. Like, there were instances where you can't, but if you try and you can succeed in doing it, I highly, it was a bonding opportunity for us as well.
Yeah,
absolutely. I remember my husband going through, he was home and he was struggling, and he, shattered a hip and broke a foot, and it was a whole recovery. And my in-laws were flying in from Florida. They would come stay a week at a time to help me. And at one point, my mother-in-law, I heard her yell at him and be like, don't talk to her like that. She's taking care of you. And she's like, you better marry her after this. Cause we've been dating for a year and a half. And she's like, we trust her. And then she's a part of our family now. And if you don't marry her, we're disowning you. Here we are 15 years later,
Yeah. No, I love that. And and that brings up a good point too, that I wanted to say earlier was, caregivers, even if, they're okay with seeing it and okay with touching a burn wound, it can also, obviously dressing changes are very painful, and we'll definitely dive more into that. But the caregivers can definitely struggle with, I'm causing pain to my survivor. And that can be a really tough thing for them to overcome as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, I think it's a strong person.
Yeah. I get that question, like, how can you do this? And again, I reiterate to them, because I know that it's going to get better. Like, I know it's going to get better. I try and be honest with them. And I will say, this first visit, like here in clinic with me, is going to be the most painful. It's not going to feel good. But after this, it will get easier. I promise it will get easier. Yeah. So it feels good to know that, if that makes sense, like to know that I can help them.
Definitely. Well, speaking of dressing changes, and I mentioned this earlier, today's podcast is powered by Monlikey Healthcare. I've had the privilege of working with their team more closely over this past year and learning about their Power of Gentle campaign, which does exactly kind of what we're talking about. It aims to reduce pain and distress and anxiety for survivors, especially during those dressing changes. So I do remember those painful experiences that I had, but being a child burn survivor, I've kind of suppressed a lot of those memories. So, even both you, Kat, and Amber, I'd love to kind of talk more about, like, obviously it makes sense why it's painful, but maybe Amber, you want to share a little from your experience of like that pain and anxiety that the dressing changes, even knowing that the clock was coming up, it was almost time to go through one, like what that was like from your perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I just had this conversation last week, and the other thing two things. One, I think for me, and I think I'm sure you hear this, Kat, all the time, but the graft in that part of my body didn't hurt, right? That wasn't the painful part.
Donor site.
The donor site was, and even I had to have a regraft because part of my graft didn't stick, and I didn't care. I was like, okay, fine. I don't want my donor site, right? That hurt the most and continues to be the worst thing for me. And to this day, like, remember that, and especially the size of my left leg. And it took us about a week or two to realize that you couldn't just rip off the zero form. And then a nurse taught us that you put the Bassi over the top to make it stop, because it gets dried up.
Yeah.
And so my husband was spending 3 hours doing dressing changes because I was in so much pain. And he was like, okay, a little bit. And then I'd have to breathe, and a little bit. And I would literally scream into a pillow. Like, I kid you not, like, because of how painful. And it was actually, so I'm in the room that we used to do the dressing changes. We had this as our wound room, and now this is my office. But we'd sit in here, he'd put on The Masked Singer for 3 hours, and we would get through like, there were like 10 seasons of that. And we would just watch it and like as a distraction, but it was the worst pain that I'd felt in a very long time until someone told us like, put the bacitracin on it, let it sit for a minute. And then guess what? It was like 1,000 times better. Yeah. But that pain hurt the most rather than the graft itself. And I remember like you'd cringe looking at it and trying to like get through like just looking at all of the different things. But looking back, I have a hard time even looking at it because of like, oh my gosh, like at the time it was not a big deal to me, but now I'm like, oh God, that's what it looked like at that time. But I think it made it easier having a caregiver that understood, right? The nurses weren't even as gentle, and I love my nurses to death, but they were very much like they had to kind of get it off and go. My husband would wait with me for 3 hours until I was like, okay to get it off because of how my husband was. So I think, yeah, reducing pain, I mean, it's going to hurt, right? It's going to hurt regardless, but having someone who knew, like my husband would either put the Masked Singer on, he'd know to put very loud, like Beyonce on in the background and would like let me jam out to some like ballad songs. But it still hurts, right? I'm not going to lie. Like, let's be honest, it hurts. And it's kind of like how you manage the pain. I think that makes you get through that. Kat, you can speak here too, but.
Yeah, I don't know through personal experience. I only know based on, years of taking care of patients. So I try to impart my very little wisdom that I have of, distraction. And I had a patient yesterday I had to remove, we've been using more RECELL lately, which has actually been kind of nice because the donor side is much smaller. And then they're putting the zero form over the RECELL. So this was like in thighs. So the zero form, as you know, it gets dry because it's just like the donor site, and then you need to moisturize. So when I get my patients for their first follow-up visit and they're like, and I said, I know your donor. They're like, how did you know that? I said, because it dries up and now you need moisturizer. And they're like, they told me to keep it, dry. I said, I know, but now it goes from it's too wet, we need to dry it, to it's too dry, it's pulling, it hurts. So like what you said, once you start moisturizing it, it gets better. So I try to help, but yesterday I had this patient and I said, just talking to them, distracting, and I pulled off the zero form. And they're like, how could you do that to me? Upset. And I said, because I knew it was ready, and I'm not trying to hurt you, but I knew it was ready. The longer we leave it on, it's, not going to help, not going to get better. Yeah. And so after, she was very mad at me, and I said, it's okay. You can be mad at me. You can hate me right now, but I promise I wouldn't have done it if I didn't think you were ready, know you were ready, distract you. And, and they're like, thank you. After, like, thank you for doing that. And I try to tell my patients, like, I will tell you if it's going to hurt. I'm going to tell you if it's bad. I don't want to try to hide.
You can't lie about it. No, because then I'm never going to trust you again.
Yeah, exactly. If I say, no, it's going to be fine. And then I I don't know, do something that's going to hurt. I try and be honest as much as I can, because that's the whole point. I want you to trust me, to know that I have your best interest at hand. I want you to get better. And I also want to not hurt you, like minimize the pain. It's going to hurt, but let's try to make it as tolerable as possible.
And I was
harder in outpatient than it is inpatient.
It is, but I still would be like, I'd hate you, right? Like truly hated you, but you were my favorite nurse, right? Like, and so I think there's that love-hate relationship that, there, and it's the same with like occupational and physical therapy. Like there's this one therapist that every time she walked me, I'm like, not again. And she knew like I was joking, only half joking, but like once after a while, I was like, okay, I hated you, but you did help me get better. Right. So, I may have hated and so I think it's important for nurses to not get offended by that too, because there were some nurses that I'd be like, ugh, I know you're right, but I don't like you in this moment, and I need you to be okay with that, right? Like, and I think that's always an important thing to talk about, is like, hey, you weren't great, but it was because I was in so much pain that I think it's a hard job as a nurse to realize that you're causing your patients pain in the moment, but you're doing it because you want them to get better. And on this side, I understand that. As a patient on that side, I was like, oh my God, not again, right? Yeah. Like, and I did have preferential nurses, right? I had like the nurses that were like, okay, she's going to be honest with me, but she's going to make it quick and painless. And we're going to distract and talk about things that I'm doing in my life and maybe vibe on other things. But there were like, you did have preferential nurses because you're like, okay, they're honest with me. They're going to not sugarcoat it. So yeah, it was an experience like no other, but I appreciated the nurses that did just what you're saying. It's like, we're honest, but also distracted me enough to like, you ripped it off, but then I'd be like, oh, okay, you did it. I'm angry with you right now, but I appreciate it because then I don't have to go through it the rest of the time.
Yeah.
So,
and I know, and sometimes I'll tell them after, like, it's okay. I'm okay being the bad guy. Cause again, I know you're going to walk out of here. You're going to hate me today. You'll come back next week and be like, thank you so much for doing that. And that's okay.
Yep.
That's okay. And oh gosh, my first like month here, I had a baby. Well, I had a 1-year-old at home and then I had a baby. I had a baby and I had to do a dressing change on this baby that was like around the same age as my kid. And I cried and the tech was, he's like, look, I've been doing this a long time. You have to know we are doing good. This is uncomfortable for you. It's uncomfortable for them, but you have to know you're doing the right thing. You're doing it properly and they're going to get better. And that stuck with me. Like I cried through that. I've gone home and cried. The other thing that I think was so different to me coming from the ER was, I don't really know what happened to my patients. Like I would stabilize them, they'd move on. I mean, I remember seeing a firework blast finger injury come into the ER and I'm like, well, I don't know what happened to that guy. I hope he got his fingers back. I have no idea. And then being here and seeing them, as I mentioned, like from admission, watching them walk out of here. I'm like, the relationship you build. And the first time I had that relationship with a patient, I asked my boss, I said, I know it's supposed to be inappropriate to like talk to your patients or like get a phone number exchange. I said, but I kind of grew up with this patient. How am I never going to speak to them again? Like, I don't. And she's like, no, burn community is different. They're like our family. Like these patients, like we've had patients for a year, they are our family. We talk to them, we communicate with them. She's like, we've had pediatric patients. Some of the nurses here also talk to them. They're 30 years old now. Like you have that relationship. And so that made me feel a little better. And I still get patients now and they're like, I love you, but I never want to see you again. Like I get it. I'm not offended. I understand. Right. I would love to see you again, but not in this capacity. I get it.
Yeah. No, that's so funny.
And it's funny because I continue to I would go back to my burn center and like a lot of it is because like I just want to maintain that connection, right? Of like being able to wish them a happy holidays or be able to see them. Yes. And I think that's sweet. But I will say to you, I did just have this conversation actually with my aunt, I think the other day of like how, and she related to this. I can't see, like I used to be okay with, not okay, but like, having a child, like seeing a child in pain, right? Or another kid or hearing about a child that's been, and just a few weeks ago, our community unfortunately had a bad accident that happened with a child around the same age of my son. He was young and I can't even stomach it. Like I can't think about it. I can't talk about it. Yeah. So I give you a lot of credit because I will tell you, I think it's after you have a kid and after that happens, I can't look at another kid in pain. I can't see another kid in pain. I can't hear about it because it literally like my gut, I get sick to my stomach about it. And I think that is just something as a mom, once you become a mom, like you see it differently. And I used to be able to at least stomach it, but now I can't even I don't want to hear about it. Because it makes you so sad. And literally like, I didn't know this child. I didn't have any relation to the family, nothing, but I literally could not think about it, talk about it. Like it made me so sad and so sick to my stomach. And so I think, like I said, I can relate to that. I'd probably do the same because it makes you think about your own and how difficult that must be for that family, for that mother, for that child. And so I think that same thing, like it's different now that I have a child. I relate very differently to that. And I think there's something in us as moms that you're like, oh my gosh, your brain changes, right? And you go through that. So I give you props because I'm sure that wasn't easy knowing how I handle those types of situations now as a parent. Yeah.
It's
hard.
definitely different, but I think like what you're saying, you relate to the mom because you're thinking of it as like if that were my kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look at it like I try to help the parents because I tell the parents the kids are fine. The kids
they're resilient.
They're easy. The kids are so easy. I know that, and they're like, but their feet, they're not going to walk. I go, I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm going to put on, and I know we're going to talk about it, but Mepalex is my favorite thing ever. Mepalex AG, especially with the kids, because I tell the parents, you don't have to do a dressing change every single day. You don't need to torture them every day with the dressing change because I know it hurts you to hurt them, or make them upset, cry, whatever. I said, I'm going to put this dressing on and we're going to leave it on until you come see me next week. And I'm telling you, by tomorrow, your kid will be walking around acting like nothing happened. And they don't believe me. And then they come back and they're like, well, their hands were wrapped. They figured out how to eat. They were playing. They're fine. And so I try to tell the parents, you don't need to be worried about the kids. I know that sounds weird. I said, you have to take care of yourself because you are going to feel so guilty, but the kid is fine.
Yeah.
Like,
no, for sure. And I can remember a few times where, yes, my dressing change is really painful, or I had the surgery, the recovery, something was really painful. But considering how many dressing changes I went through and how many surgeries I went through, those memories that I have are so minimal compared to, like the fun I would have at like camp with other burn survivors, having fun, or like going to the playroom at the hospital. Like those are the things I remember. I don't remember the pain. Sometimes, yes, of course.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good for parents to know.
Yeah.
But I know you mentioned, I can't remember that product you mentioned, but can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because like I said, I have been so far out from the physical healing, and obviously burn care has changed tremendously, even in the last few years, let alone since I had my injury a long time ago. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that sounds amazing. If, once a week a dressing change, that could be a huge game changer for so many folks.
Yes. So we use Molecule product, and it's called Mepalex AG. So it is a foam pad, a gray foam pad that has silver and antimicrobials in it. And we love it because we use it a lot. So if you come to the ER, you see a burn nurse, like 90% of the time, we're going to use that. If it's like a 2nd-degree burn, because instead of doing dressing changes, because what we find is a lot of patients are afraid to wash it, or I know we talked about burn education, like there is just not a lot, like ER doctors, urgent cares, they tell them, don't wash it, don't touch it, don't wash it, don't get it. And we're over here going, please wash it. You need to wash it every single day. It's super important. So to kind of eliminate that and the anxiety with washing or seeing the burns, we use this product. So I'll debride a blister, and underneath, and again, I try to educate my patients as best I can for them, but I explain to them, we're going to make this easy on you. We think this is going to be okay, or we know this is going to heal by next week. We're going to I like to call it my little magic pad, and they come in all different sizes, and it's sticky on one side. So I debride let's say if it's on the arm, I then put the dressing right on top, nothing in between, and I wrap it with either Curlex or Coban, something to keep it in place. So the minimum amount of days is like 3-4 days, and it can stay on up to 7, and it absorbs any drainage. We leave it on. They'll come see me. I'll take it off when they're here, and I'll get it a little wet, pull it off, and most of the time it's either mostly healed or it's totally healed, the burn. It's literally like a little magic pad. It's awesome. And I like it especially for kids because you don't have to do anything. Like you don't need to scrub anything, wash anything. You just leave it alone. The only thing is you just can't get it wet, which I know for kids is hard. For usually adult males is very difficult. They like to touch and disturb my dressings, but it's pretty amazing. Like when I have ERs that call and like, what do you do? And I'm like, well, we have Mepalex and most places do not. So that is my favorite thing. And I swear by it. I will tell anybody about it. It's the best.
No, that is amazing. It's amazing that you can, it is like a magic pad when you say it like that. And just that you can put it on and let it go and come back and hopefully it be fully healed or mostly healed. That's a huge game changer for so many folks.
It is. It's really nice. I really, really like it. We don't use it as much inpatient, again, because we're, they're grafted. We're doing daily dressing. Some of our surgeons actually put it on donor sites. Like if they're small donor sites, they'll use a Metplex over that instead of the zero form and kind of change that out. And I've seen good results with that as well. There's just more drainage. But sometimes I teach a family member, if they come with them, how to take it off. So in 4 days, go home, take it off, shower, wash, put a new pad on. So I'll teach them how to do that too.
Yeah. And aside from, we talked a little bit about like distractions. I know Amber said she put on like the Masked Singer. Are there any other tips, Kat, that you have for either minimizing pain or trying to, I don't know, just help with those dressing changes, whether that's for caregivers at home or even other burn care professionals who are maybe newer in their career?
Yeah, I noticed like, with new nurses, I think a lot of them are afraid to, one, hurt their patient, but also be kind of stern with their patient, kind of like what Amber was saying. You have that nurse that you're like, I knew they were going to come in, be honest, be direct, and get it done. And I think that's kind of a challenge because you want people to like you and you want to be the nice, fun nurse. It's just not always possible. So I like to, I'll tell my patients, this is what we're going to do. I tell them exactly what I'm going to do. I try to walk them through it because I think a surprise is not nice, minus the one I just told you about yesterday where I just ripped it off because I need it done. But, so yes, find something to distract yourself. Is there something you want to watch? Is there a show you're in? Do you have a favorite song you're listening to, a podcast you're listening to? Do you have virtual reality goggles? Do you just have something to distract you? Kind of plan ahead. I also like to make sure I have all my supplies ready to go. So you're not there open, wet, wondering what's going to happen, what goes where. That's something also I teach when I used to train the nurses, make sure everything is ready to go. So you're not scrambling at the last minute trying to find supplies. I would take pain meds if you can, I teach my patients 30, 45 minutes before you shower, take some ibuprofen, Motrin, Tylenol, leave your dressing on.
30 minutes before, we always took pain medicine and then we waited. And sometimes we'd forget. And if we forgot, it was always worse. So it's funny, until you just said that, I didn't remember that. 30 minutes before, we always, we prepped for that, right? And I knew I'd feel not as bad before or after, during a dressing change if we took the pain medicine out. And until you just said that, I totally forgot about that. Probably because I had been taking pain medication.
Yes.
But,
yeah, take it before. Again, have everything ready to go. And then it's like a mindset. Know that it's going to suck for a little bit. But again, we're trying to get the end goal. We're trying to reach our end goal. So I tell the parents, for kids, kids feed off the energy of their parents. So when I have a parent who's freaking out and then all of a sudden the kid starts freaking out because the kid thought they were fine. The kid doesn't know. So as the caregiver, if you can stay chill and as best you can, that will help relax your burn survivor as well. The best you can relax. I am lucky enough. We have a great child life specialist and we get tons of donations. And so I have toys. She brings distraction things. I mean, even sometimes when I have adults, I was like, will you just come talk to them for me? Or distract them. I give lollipops to my adult patients too. I know that was really hard and I know it sucked. Do you want a lollipop? And they're like, you know what? I do. And I go, great. Why not?
We've talked before, I think on the show, or at least I have with some of my coworkers, of how we need adult life specialists. Just the kids get toys, the adults need just as many toys.
Yep, I do that. I mean, sometimes I do it as kind of a joke, but then I think they actually really like it because, you know, it's like, yeah, you did something hard. You deserve a treat. You did something really hard.
For sure.
100%. And sometimes for us, again, this is terrible because we talk about nutrition and the issue that we have with nutrition, right, as survivors.
Yeah.
But we treat ourselves with pizza after a 3-hour dressing change. But in that moment, I'm like, that's what we needed. That's what we needed. But in the long run, right? Okay, I think there is something to be said, and I talked about this just last week as well, about how we pump our patients with a ton of protein shakes and food, and then we don't teach them how to come down from that, or we don't educate. And so that is something I think that is really important in the world of burn care as a patient. How can I hook up with a nutritionist after my burn injury?
Yep.
Yes, I agree. I think I realized too, now being more in the outpatient world, there are just so many little things I think that we struggle with, because connecting those dots, right? When you go home, all the things we do for you when you're in the hospital, and then you go home, like you're saying, home health really doesn't know, you don't know what to do about your protein. When is it okay to touch my donor and do that? Like, I know somebody told me, but I don't really remember because you're in a state of shock. And then, am I doing physical therapy? Like, who can I talk to? I'm not sleeping at night. And these are such big things. And I think I've noticed, like, the hospitals as a whole, I don't think they understand the amount of resources that a burn patient actually needs. And so they don't really want to fund it, because they're like, yeah, I mean, they're healed, right? They're grafted. Like, what else do they need? And they don't take into account all these other things. So I really hope that is changing culturally. I mean, you ladies with your podcast, I've told my patients, I have this one patient it's been 2 years I've been seeing her, and she's still struggling. And I'm like, I swear to God, every side effect that is like, maybe this might happen, she's had. And it is so hard to see her like that, because she tries and she's so positive and she's still going through it. I told her about the podcast, and she sat and she's like, I'm going to listen to it right now. I'm going to listen to it on my way home. I said, good, because you need that. And insurance, don't even get me started on insurance, of like, well,
I don't even want to chat about that.
I know, that's a whole different thing. But you know, they need help. Like, and where we live, there's only so many burn centers, and we have whole counties that don't have burn centers. And so support groups aren't always available. And I think that's where, again, your podcast is super helpful to those patients who are like, yeah, I live 2 hours away, I'm not going to drive in for a support group, or just things like that. There's just so many holes. And I get so like fired up about it, because I want to help everybody. And I feel bad just saying like, okay, good luck. Go find a therapist to help you. Sorry, I'm done with you. That's hard for me.
No, for sure. And Amber and I can both definitely relate to that as well. And, you know, just even at our staff retreat a few weeks ago, we were talking about that of, you know, we all want to do as much as we possibly can. And we know there's gaps, and we know there's so many survivors out there who haven't even heard of Phoenix Society or have another survivor in their life. And it's so challenging, because it's like, we want to do everything, but we can't do everything all at one time. And that's something I know that we struggle with.
Yeah, it's so hard.
Yeah. Well, and I do kind of want to talk a little bit more, because I know you are an outpatient burn clinic supervisor now. So can you just tell us a little bit more of like, I guess, like, what's a day in your life look like? I'm sure it's probably different most days, but what's a typical day look like for you?
Yeah. So I don't just see clinic patients. I help out a lot with like education stuff, which is why I talk about it a lot. I try to do more outreach stuff too, but I see about 8 to 10 patients a day on average. So I have a mix between, people who like just burn themselves, just clinic patients, versus I have post-surgical patients as well that I see with my burn surgeons. So I get all ages. We have all ages here, and I love seeing the kids. I know that sounds a little morbid, but I love my little burn kids because they make me happy, because normally they're happy. And I know I get to help them and I get to play with them, and that's super fun for me. So educating patients, I do a lot of calls for, like, we get a lot of work comps. So it's getting authorizations for patients for garments. We do garment fittings. Our OTPT will come see our post-surgical patients here, and they help out a lot. They're very involved and try to help out as much as possible. So we'll send out referrals for that as well. I take calls from other ERs, other urgent cares, doctors to kind of help them if they want to know kind of what to do, a little guidance, or if a patient needs to come in or not come in. Yeah, I help the staff on the floor if they have questions, because we do have a lot of newer-ish grads in the last like few years. And so they have kind of questions of how we do burn care. We're very surgical based, and so it's a little different than other places. So I try to encourage them to, like, again, talk to your patients, spend time with them, get to know them. I think that's a huge part too, is if you can build
rapport, I have to agree.
They will listen to you. They won't.
We had Joey on this show again, who was my nurse, and we can link that podcast too. But that is like the number one thing I think I appreciated about Orlando Health more than anywhere else I've been, is they spend time getting to know me, and they know me. I kid you not. Joey walked into my room just the other day. Like, I went a couple months back, and he was like, "How's your son?" Right. So like, and then I had another nurse from clinic that was like, "How's your son?" Like, take the few minutes to get to know me. Yes. Dr. Smith walks in, shakes my husband's hand, and says, "Oh, how about Michigan?" Right. So it is like little aspects of our life that they remember, that they care about, and it means so much. And even if it's like, I don't know if you guys do this, but like writing it down, I remember like I used to write things down about folks when I worked in marketing, so I could remember, and it made me a better marketing professional. So I think like the power of connection is so important. I cannot continue to like stress that, whether it's in burn care, like people care about that, and it makes you a better like customer service folk, right? Because you are doing that level of like customer service. And we talk about that a lot in marketing, but it's applicable across the board.
It is, because you need them to trust you. Like this affects their appearance or how they feel about themselves, or we get patients from certain cultures that they're like, they just need to be normal again, and I'm like, well, they may not be. How can we help you help them or feel comfortable? And to do that, you kind of have to trust that I'm going to be honest with you and lead you in the right direction. So I have that too. I had a patient who, it was a really bad burn, who was with us for like 6 months, and his wife was pregnant and had a baby during that time. And so, now that kid is like 3, which is wild to me. But every time I see him, I'm like, how's the baby? It's like, not a baby anymore. Took a kid to college. Like, it's just, but again, that's why I love my job, because I like talking to people. I like getting to know their backgrounds. And this is another thing where I think either you're into burns or you're not. Like, I don't think you can be the type of provider that can just come in and do a dressing and leave. It's really not, it's not like that. I don't know how else to explain that. It's not a wound. So when people are like, it's a wound, I go, but it's not. It's a burn. It's different.
Well, and that's why, like I go to the American Burn Association annual meetings, and I see the same faces and there are a lot of new faces in the burn care world right now. But you see those folks that you see every single year who have spent their whole lives in burn care. And it's so true. It's like you either love it or you don't. And honestly, we want only the people who love it, because that makes, for burn survivors, makes their healing journey better when you have folks like yourself who are passionate and know it's a lifelong healing. It's not something you come in for and then leave and go home and never go back to the burn clinic ever again.
Right. And I feel bad for the patients, again, because of insurance. Like, they need so much more help, but we can't see them anymore. And that to me is so hard. And going to ADA and listening to these conferences of like these speakers in other states, and they're like, how do you handle that? And they're like, I don't know. Would they just pay for it? I'm like, who is paying? I want to know. I wish we had those resources all the time too. So I know I just booked my trip to go for next year.
Yes, I know it'll be here, but I mean, I can't believe this year's like over. So that's going to be here. Yeah. Well before we know it. So it's definitely exciting. Well, I do want to ask before we do our final questions. I know we're coming up here on our time, but I want to talk a little bit quickly about just burnout because, Kat, you seem so great and like enthusiastic about helping survivors, but it's not an easy job. You can love it and it's still not an easy job to do. So can you just talk a little bit about, maybe how you practice self-care or, why you still have this love for burn care after so many years of working in it?
Yeah. Well, part of it is I'm not on the floor anymore. That definitely you take a beating being on the floor with really heavy patients. And burn units are up and down. You have like busy season or you have like 3 patients. You have like nothing. I think the hardest time, and I mean, I have my own trauma with seeing like 93% burns being new to this. And, there are images that I will never forget of seeing these patients. And I have cried a lot. My husband doesn't really understand. Like I'll try to talk to him about it, but, you form a bond. I think one of the biggest things is our team is very close. Like we have amazing surgeons. We have great techs. We help each other because that's all you have. Like you cannot do a 3-hour burn dressing by yourself with your patient. Like it happens sometimes, but it's not possible. You really need a good team. So the best thing is, especially when it's so hard, is make sure you have those coworkers that you can lean on. They're the only ones who can kind of understand. Like even my nursing friends in different, like who work in different areas, like you don't really understand burns. Again, you guys know that it's so different. So that I'm a big reader. I love my Kindle a lot, but I just started grad school, so I've had to kind of put it down a little bit. Yes. I have to write papers now instead of reading from my Kindle. I go to a lot of concerts. I mean, I have my kids. I try to do fun stuff with them. And that makes a difference. Like seeing my kids happy, smile, laugh is always fun because it's a distraction. Like it's hard to come home. I mean, I'm here 8-9 hours a day. Like I leave. Sometimes I don't even see my kids in the morning, come to work. I'm here all day. And then I go to my second job, which is picking up kids from school, dinner, homework, because my husband does the morning. So I try to do the afternoons. And it's exhausting and I'm tired, but then, we'll snuggle up together and I don't know, watch a Katy Perry music video and laugh and it's fine. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, especially with kids. I think you have very few moments and those are the ones I cherish at the end of the day, both with my kids at bedtime, but then also once they go to bed, I'm like, as a mom, sometimes you just cherish that 1 hour you have of quiet time with your husband. And sometimes we don't do anything, we just sit there and talk. And then there are days where we just sit there and sit on our phones.
Scroll.
Scroll. And sometimes we sit on our phone together. He'll sit and we watch a funny video. And then there are moments where you're just like, I don't want anything to do with you either. So I'm going to go and sit in my room while you play a video game. And I just want to watch some trash TV. And my girl, Rachel, knows everything about watching that trash TV. So
that is, I know. And I have like on my little family group chat, they're like, what are you guys watching? Like mystery or murder show or like, suspense. I go, no, my brain is, I need happy things. I need to watch adult women yell at each other sometimes and realize that that's not me and I'm not going to live that life. And that's great because it's like a fantasy. And my friend makes fun of me and they're like, are you at home in bed on your heating pad? I go, yes, my heating pad. And we love each other. I get in bed. It's like 8:00 at night. That's all I need.
Yeah. Sometimes that's what you need. Sometimes I'm like, I cry to my husband and I'm like, I just want to watch TV in bed and eat in bed. And sometimes we do. Sometimes we have dinner in bed.
Yes.
And guess what? That's
the best.
what I need. Yep. So there you go. Our sleep friend that we've had on the show may not agree with that. But
I was just thinking that. I was like, Dr. Shearer would be so mad to hear you guys eating dinner in bed.
She'd be mad.
Every day.
Sometimes
not every day.
No, not every day. But there are one-off occasions where I am tapped out and I just need sleep in bed and then dinner in bed and to just relax. So that is, yes, if she's listening,
I'm saying yes. I'm saying good for you. I'm saying yes. Once a week, do it.
As long as it's not a habit, you're fine.
Yeah. Sometimes it's like once a month, so it's okay, right?
Yeah.
Like once a year, once a month, once every 6 months. It's all right. Well, with that said, we are coming up on time here, but we always ask our guests 2 questions. And so my final question for you is, what is one thing that you would want the world to know about being a burn care professional? And it can be the world that you live in. You can be at the world of burn survivors. You could be anyone.
Ooh, that it is such a special place to be as a provider, because you really touch people's lives. As I mentioned, I love talking to my patients. I love learning about them. I love being part of their lives. That it takes a special person, and I think it makes you, it's very rewarding. That's what I'll say. It's very rewarding. And that's hard to say like to a patient because I'm sorry that you're burned, but I like being able to actually affect change.
I love that. I love that so much. Well, it is time for our final question, which today, it is our Phoenix Partner question, which today is sponsored by Monleki Healthcare, a world-leading medtech company that specializes in sustainable solutions for wound care and surgical procedures. So their question is, what is one word you would use to describe the burn survivor community?
Strong.
Oh.
Strong. If I could use 2, I would say capable of, well, 3, capable of anything.
I like that.
But strong for sure.
Strong and capable of everything. We'll just lump it all together to one word.
Yes. Okay, perfect.
Awesome. Well, Kat, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show today. I so appreciate it. I mean, I just love hearing your enthusiasm for helping burn survivors. It's like very refreshing to me to hear that. So I just appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your wisdom and talking about burn care dressings with Amber and I today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So much fun having you here. And I hope that you'll maybe join us again soon in the future.
Yes.
Yeah. Bye, ladies.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Girls with Grafts. If you are enjoying this content, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.